a, st
Sorry, Ivor.
a stable kind of glucose that's a little higher doesn't correlate with poor outcomes near as spikes do. And I think, you know, the study authors of those studies kind of say, oh, the spikes are the problem. It's the transient spike. That's a fair point, you know. Big spike for a couple of hours is damaging. And then, you know, you're level for hours. And I'm okay with the spikes pattern being the damaging thing. But also the spikes pattern indicates type 2 diabetes type problems. Whereas the steady higher level, which doesn't really correlate with poor outcomes, that can reflect people like Sean Baker. So yeah, you got to pick this apart. You know, if you're lean and slim and running a high glucose, but without big spikes and with your insulin low, you may be in that kind of zone and there may not be much to address. But I think ultimately, if you do more fasting, it might break that cycle or it might not. It's the kind of thing you'd monitor over time, I would say, or I would.
It's interesting because also that ties in a little bit with what we did with Donal, you know, with his metabolic and everything, because for me, it's, you know, although I might be running a relatively high blood sugar, I had no, actually seemed to have no problem with the insulin. The insulin spiked, and then, you know what I mean? The whole Kraft thing showed that the insulin was actually in the manageable, you know, was quite low and didn't react massively over the blood sugar. So I would like to think that's the case, because without talking just about my case, but you know, the trig HDL ratios with me are also very good. I mean, I have some other things that I might be slightly more worrying, but maybe that's just the way we are, Paul, Colin, that we just run in that, you know, slightly high. I mean, one thing I wanted to ask there, and I know Steve's asking it for the next one, is that spikes in the blood sugar, yes, but isn't the rate of descent, so to speak, from the spike more telling than the actual spike itself, if you see what I mean? How quickly it returns back to a normal
yeah, that's
level.
important, because they're curves, there's multiple areas, but yeah, if it rises up pretty fast, that's fine. But it is what does it rise to? What's the 1 hour and 2 hour level? I mean, how does it come back down? So it should come down like a Gompertz curve nicely, and it should level out at your baseline glucose and not undershoot. So hypoglycemia is another sign of dysregulation. So it goes up kind of really high, and maybe it takes a bit long to come down, or it comes down under, like it goes down to around 3.5 millimoles. That's a sign of the type 2 diabetic problem. So the insulin has not had a very fast response, very efficient response, the glucose coming down promptly like it should. And rather the insulin comes out with a longer, kind of slower response to higher levels, and then ultimately drives down the glucose in a slower way, and then overshoots and drives it down under. And that's the falling asleep at your desk hypoglycemia of type 2 diabetics, the afternoon naps, the slumps an hour or two after a meal. You know, so if you think of it like, instead of your insulin jumping in, managing the glucose, and it comes down and it's good control and it comes down to where it should be and it stays there. Imagine the guy who eats the meal, the insulin first phase response is not ideal, and then the insulin keeps riding up higher and higher to try and bring down this glucose that has surged up too high, and then overshoots and ultimately drives it too low, whereupon the person gets tired, dizzy, brain fog, falls asleep at the desk. So, but we have the Kraft, we could revisit the Kraft curves and look at the different ones, but insulin's important. If the insulin is behaving in a pulsatile way and coming down promptly, and so is the glucose, that's what you're aiming for. Well, you mean every time you measure your glucose randomly, it's always like up over 6?
That's for you, Paul.
Yeah, well, I've been experimenting for the last week, 10 days since I got the CGM on. So it seems to be running around 6 no matter what I do. And I was telling the guys I tried a lot of fruit yesterday just to see what would happen, and I've tried some cake and things like that, just to see how it's reacted. So it does go up. It hasn't gone up above 8.89. It does come down. It tries to get back around 6 or under 6, 5.7, 6, 6.1, thereabouts. So it's constantly going up and down. And even when I try and spike it myself with knowing I'm eating sugar, it never goes above 9. It does come down, and it sort of settles around just under 6, between 5.7 and
I love
6.
that. I love, Paul, the personification of your CGM. Like it's a person, not, you know, it's like nothing to do with me. It's doing what it should do. But
Yeah, well,
That's it. Well, yeah. So if it pops up to 8 or 8.5 and that kind of level when you're eating bad stuff,
yeah,
that's how, I mean, the problem people I know, you're talking 15. David Bobbitt was mid-20s. You know, I mean, these are huge numbers. But yeah, jumping up to 8 or so, or 8.5, or whatever it is, or even 8.8, and that kind of towards the 9 can happen. Mine, as it happens, last time I checked, which is years ago, it doesn't really. Even I ate a couple of bags of hula hoops to kind of eat a load of glucose. It was a step in for glucose, and I just noticed it just doesn't rise much at all. But that's normal enough to go up to 8. If it comes down and it's back down in an hour, and in an hour and a half, it's right getting back down to where it was.
yeah.
You know.
Daniel, you've got a question, or?
Yes. Good morning, Ivor. You mentioned fasting will have interaction on this glucose thing. Wouldn't it be interesting for Paul to fast for 24 hours? Because that's a cool thing. We say that the body's recalibrating, isn't it?
Yeah, essentially, yeah, you're draining out, you know, fat stores, potentially dysfunctional, and you're bringing down all the hormones. And like the guy we had with Dr. Donald Collins there in Gabor. Now, he had a particular problem. He had an exhausted pancreas, so it was a massive benefit for him. But that's always the kind of, when things are not just picture perfect, even though you're doing the right stuff, fasting is always the thing you can bring to the party. And do one meal a day, you know, for several days or a week, and then just see how things have changed. Now, you're not guaranteed a specific change, of course, because of the Baker phenomenon and other things where some lean people can run high glucagon, and that's just it. And I don't think that doing a bit of fasting will likely really change that. But if there is kind of high-ish glucose, especially with high-ish insulin, fasting's a killer thing to do for a week or so, maybe, of one meal a day, and really backing everything off, draining out the adipocytes.
A friend of mine a couple of weeks ago did a fasting course in the north of Germany, and she said, you know, never paid so much for so little. So she was in like this wonderful hotel, and you know, going for long walks, and but it was kind of funny that they were only they were still being given fruit and salad actually as their sort of top-ups during the day. So, you know, we could, you know, argue about how good that is. But
yeah, I mean, I always say with one meal a day, keep like tin of sardines or hard cheeses or pepperoni or kind of that French saucisson sausage, or, you know, tasty, high fat, high protein things that when you nibble at them, if you really feel you need something and you want to break the fast a bit, you know, they're nibblers that you just have a little bit and then you're done. Or even some nuts can do that, or some olives. Yeah. But the kind of playing around with salad, to me, doesn't really help. But
yeah. Okay, so we've got Colin and Chris, and then we're going to move on, Sharon, to CAC scores. Colin?
Yeah, Ivor, just with fasting, and I'm a lightweight, and so when I fast, I just lose more weight, and I can ill afford to lose weight, I guess. And previously, it hasn't mattered what I've eaten. I've never been able to put on weight. I've been to the gym a few times working out, but then thinking, nah, it didn't actually change anything either. It's just I've got fast metabolism, I guess. Some people think, well, what are you complaining about? I've been trying to lose this weight for life, and here's you trying to put it on. But it's no use to me, because fasting, I lose more weight, and then I really crave. I start craving for food during that week. I have tried the one meal a day thing for about 4 or 5 days, and so any suggestions there?
Yeah, so this one comes up now and then. It's a good complaint in today's world, people might say. So you don't have a tendency to make the adipocytes. It's funny that people with lipodystrophy, an extreme example of where they just don't make fat cells, subcutaneous normal fat cells at all, hardly. They're all ripped and muscular, like they're incredible looking, like their muscles stick out and super skinny, and they're pretty much all type 2 diabetic. So the irony is, I'm not saying that about you. I'm just saying there's so many nuances here. And the reason is that, as Dr. Ron Rosedale said, what was the phrase he said about obesity is the price you pay for not becoming diabetic, or words to that effect. The thing is, you can have 500-pound super fat guys and they're not type 2 diabetic, essentially. And the reason is that once you can keep expanding your subcutaneous fat stores and they stay healthy, which is a genetic ability, if you will, you can keep the system working even though you're eating too much. And then when you get to the point of kind of a fat threshold and your body is no longer happy making more adipocytes, and you build visceral fat, and then you fall into diabetes. But the lipodystrophy, super skinny guys who can't make fat, head straight into type 2 diabetic dysfunction because the fat cells are what manage and mediate everything, the whole energy balance, the whole system. And they release all the cytokines and hormones and leptin. Just the fat cell is an incredible organ. People just think, oh, it's something that, makes you look less good if there's too much of it. So if there's a tendency there, you can be apparently slim and still have a problem, but you got to ask the question, well, but do you? If you're eating whole foods, low carb, and your bloods across the board triangulate to being good, an isolated, non-spiking with normal insulin, high-ish glucose, you see, we're really narrowing down now in an obsessive sense, perhaps, given Sean Baker and the other examples of people who are running high on the glucose, and we know they're super healthy, super fit. So that's just re-emphasizing the glucose one. Putting on weight, we tend to say, cheeses and double cream added is easy calories that tends to be fattening. For instance, it's the problem with people who are sticking to a low carb diet and can't lose weight. It can be they need to pull butters and cheeses and all these high energy, easy eat things out. So that's one. There's no magic answer here, but it's one thing for people who want to put on weight. Now, of course, in Raging Bull, Robert De Niro, or some of the other actors, they go basically pizza and beer. And it's just so edible, pizzas and beer, and junk food, and they just keep cramming it in, and just bellies come out of nowhere. It's hard to imagine not being able to do that. You probably could do that, but you don't want to eat crap. So
couldn't do that.
No, so it's the you're just back to the kind of cream, cheeses, stuff of foods, nuts. Like overeating of nuts can be actually fattening because they're so energy dense and yet easy to eat, especially when salted. So they're the kind of things. There is healthy stuff that tends to be weight promoting. The other thing is people then who like wine. Unfortunately, I like wine too much. And you knock away a few glasses of wine, that's a lot of calories, and you don't even feel them. So, but again, you don't, that's not good to be drinking alcohol. But it is a sneaky way, if you enjoy wine with your meal, to dump in several hundred extra calories that you don't even notice, and yet they've gone in. So anyway, I'm rambling a bit, but specifically on wanting to put on weight. And then the other thing is the question, of course, fasting then doesn't suit you. But then the question is, do you need to fast at all? So you'd have to remind me again. I mean, how high are the glucoses? How spiky are they?
10.5 on peaches. But it came back to 7.5.
Yeah, you were the peach crumble guy from last week, right?
Yeah.
Well, like eating stuff like, the other thing is, if you're generally on a healthy diet and you suddenly eat glucose, you get huge spikes. I mean, that's why for the craft test, you have to go 2 weeks onto moderate carb before you even do the test, because a low carber usually will come in, if they suddenly eat peaches and cream, they can get a disproportionate high spike in glucose. And their insulin will actually stay very low, and their body actually isn't even, it's out of shape for the glucose. The glucose suddenly comes in, the body's like a coiled spring that's keeping gluconeogenesis, keeping glucose out because none's coming in. It's keeping the insulin down, and suddenly you dump in a tin of peaches. I can't respond. So the insulin doesn't respond fast and the glucose goes way up, but they're typified by insulin having a low response but glucose going high. So again, you need the insulin to see what's happening.
Yeah, which I'm working on that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Chris, you got a question?
Yeah,
Thank you, Ivor.
good morning, Ivor. I have a question about intermittent fasting. I have done it extensively and it's been really successful for me. I don't really have a weight problem, but I can carry a belly, and the intermittent fasting worked really well for that. But the one problem I do have, and I was able to get through it with a functional medicine doctor, was severe gut pain. And the intermittent fasting tends to sort of bring that out. Like if I just eat one meal a day, I'll wake up in the morning, I won't be hungry, I'll be quite happy, but I will have that pain sort of coming back on. And I wonder, is there something I'm doing wrong? I mean, I'm hydrating, if I'm intermittent fasting, oftentimes I'll have bone broth instead of anything solid, so just wondering if there's anything that intermittent fasting tends to exacerbate the sort of,
that's one that hasn't really come up. I mean, stomach pain sounds specifically like something like, the celiac or the, Crohn's disease, again, mostly from grains and those kind of planty problems that affect your gut lining. But this hasn't really come up like I mean, when you fast, ghrelin goes up and your stomach contracts, and maybe for some people that translates as a discomfort or a pain. And the only reason I'm saying this is anecdotal. I thought when switching to longer fast periods that in the morning, I perhaps had a sensitivity when I pressed my stomach, and the hypochondriac and everyone is wondering, I wonder if I got a problem, and, a sensitivity. And then I wonder, was it my bladder? My bladder was a bit full. And when I was pressing, was that the discomfort? And then I asked Jeff Gerber, my buddy, and he said, well, where are you pressing? And he said it could be a mild hernia. So then that was another theory, that there was an undiagnosed mild hernia, which can give discomfort and kind of pain in that region. And then it kind of went away, and then I kind of noticed it another time. And I never dealt with it, but I just thought I'd mention it because it was personal. And when you're saying pain, is it like a classic, I mean, significant, like you would say to someone, I've got a stomach ache? Or is it a discomfort and an awareness or a hyper awareness?
It's more of it's almost a pain, I want to say where the pancreas is, and then lower down in the gut a little bit. And it might be hypochondria, because I did get treated for, a digestive problem, and we got through that. And that I feel like I almost died. I was in the middle of a film in London, and I was able to get through it with herbs. So it might be like, maybe because my stomach's so empty, maybe there's no pressure, and so that sort of exacerbates it a little bit. I guess it just scared me because I thought, oh my God, I never want to go back to that digestive pain. But I'm going to try it again. It's anyway.
Well, cool. Okay, we've got a question from John, and I know we want to move on to CAC scores, and I don't know how you're doing for time, Ivor, and ultimately we want to talk maybe a little bit about thyroid, I think is one of the things that's come up a couple of times.
It's just a quick one, actually, Ivor. So I've sometimes done the what I would describe as the intermittent fasting, which is 1 or 2 days in a week taking much lower calories, but having a gap between them, as opposed to a full week. What's the difference in effectiveness between those two things?
Yeah, there's no definitive answer. I mean, the hardcore fasting people say that unless you do 36, 48 hours and above, that's what really is the anti-cancer fasting, where, you know, you lower everything right down. I remember those arguments were made. And then there's the 5-2, I think, wasn't that Molesley?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, was that 5 days kind of lean and 2 days then splurging a little? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But for me, a pretty much steady state of meal skipping is what I've always cycled back to for habit forming, for keeping. Going in and out of a regime, it's hard to habit form. Oh, what day am I on? Oh, this is the day where I don't have the habit of eating one meal. This is the day where I have 3 meals. Oh, I'll eat a lunch now. You know, you're managing it. For me, it's just simple. 1 meal a day, unless you're meeting someone for lunch. And that's an exception, or you're out with the family. Then you have a lunch meal, whereupon I find I have almost no appetite in the evening, because my body just gets this meal at the midday that it's not expecting. And then the appetite collapses through the rest of the day completely. I'm nearly disappointed. I'm not in the mood for my evening meal, which I'm used to. So again, I go for the habit forming of pretty much every day, 1 meal a day, or 2 meal a day is popular. And just consistency, you know. Most humans like consistency for work day as well, and for your work patterns. I know when I come out to my office, I don't have to have breakfast. I go straight out, and I won't have to go back in for lunch. If I want to, I can just keep working away if I'm interested, or I can just take a break and make a second coffee. I just like the consistency. But anyway, what's better? It's very hard to say, because it's personal. Females particularly, it appears, doing the 1 meal a day in the longer fast, on average, females find it less helpful and more problematic. I think males genetically, just from their genetic millions of years stuff, evolution, seem to be more tailored to long fasts without being affected. I'm not sure there's an answer. I like consistency, you know, whether it's 2 meals a day or whether it's 1 meal a day. 3 meals a day, it's hard to see as being ideal for anyone, really.
And there used to be a lot of, well, I know a lot of people used to go this whole grazing theory as well, that you got to keep snacking all day long. I think we mentioned this last week as well, which is, yeah.
But the other thing on the pain, though, mentioned by Chris, hyper awareness of pain is incredible. And I had an example. I did asbestos removal when I was a kid in America, in upstate New York. Yeah, I shouldn't have done it, but we were 19, you know. But luckily, I wore the.
I did the same thing. That's funny.
And you know, mesothelioma that you only get from asbestos, the cancer of your mesothemes, the bags of fluid around your organs, pretty much incurable. And you know, you'd be aware of that. Now, luckily, my buddies from Ireland were not listening during the training course. You had to do a 4-day OSHA training course before you were allowed to do it. It was just because of your rights to know the danger. And we were all drinking each night. We were students, and the people were asleep in the course, but I was highly technical always. And I was drawn to the graphs and the autopsies and the lung diagrams. I was drawn into it. And then I understood the mechanism. And I said, shit, that mechanism is shocking. Because of course, the asbestos doesn't just come in, poison you, damage you, and later maybe you'll develop cancer. The asbestos fibers stay there and they keep damaging you every day, for decades. And the mechanism was so exquisite, I actually was frightened. So I actually wore the mask to the point I had blood blisters around my face. I would not take off the mask. But there was one incident where I was missing the filters. I didn't know. And that generates a kind of an awareness of, oh, I wonder, did I take a risk? And then when I hurt my ribs there, starting a diesel generator, I knew this pain in my side, lower side, diffuse pain. I knew it was some little torn muscle. But your mind's kind of saying to you, yeah, but you know, rib pain, is it a lung pain? And it's very hard not to think like that. And I just brutally destroy that thought process. I say, right, I always monitor my health broadly, but I'm not a hypochondriac. and, you know, just keep an eye on things and try not to get drawn in. If you focus on an ache.
Just a little appendix there. You know, when I was 18, I worked as a gardener in an old people's home, and one of my jobs, because we used to do a wide variety of jobs, it was great fun actually, was to clean the boiler house. And it was like, it was a big old people's home. So the boiler house was like a small house. It was full of pipe lagging, which at the time was freaking asbestos. And it was the really dusty environment. And I was like, I'm 18, I'm invincible. And I didn't even bother wearing a mask. I can't remember. Well, you know what? You know, I had a lung cancer, I had a cancer at the back of my throat where the tonsils were. And I'm all, you know, nobody knows, but I'm almost thinking that asbestos dust had stuck there in the little, you know, the back of my throat and had at some point triggered a tumor. You never know. You never know. You know, I don't want to go necessarily down that rabbit hole, but it's kind of, and I wasn't being, you know, anything like a hypochondriac, because actually I'd checked out my lungs a couple of times before and they were all clear, but you know, there is.
Well, yeah, it's possible, but it's a good reminder of the environmental toxin side, which I don't get into as much. I stick to the kind of simple stuff: food, exercise, sun, vitamin D, magnesium, all these things. When you get into environmental toxin history, you're into the vague area, and it's arguable, does it bring much value? But at the same time, we mentioned about the dental hygiene could be a special cause of a bacterial load. The other guy I met who had SIBO, intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and a high liver enzyme GGT for 15 years. And it was only when he self-researched and discovered that he had SIBO and got it fixed with special antibiotics, his GGT dropped right down. Now, we don't know how pathological that was, but it's another example of a special case. And, you know, usually the asbestos, really, it's in the alveoli of the lungs, the little sacs down the end where it can't get out, that it causes the damage. Elsewhere in the body, it can usually be dealt with. But then leaded petrol, they now quietly have come out with papers, BMJ a couple of years ago, and they suspect that leaded petrol for those decades caused millions of early heart attacks. I mean, it's lead in the environment is a toxin that at a population level, many people will go on to be 95 and they can handle that bit of lead and they can clear it quickly. But some people don't clear metals, and if they work in the city all through the leaded decades, they could have taken on enough to cause serious issues, and no one acknowledged it. So when the heart disease began to slow its growth into 90s, 2000s and all, they all said, oh, statins. It's not true. If you look at the data, statins just doesn't correlate at all, because we know they do. Look, I'm not getting into drugs, but we know they do relatively bugger all. But the leaded petrol faded away as a driver, and smoking collapsed as a population percentage driver. They're the things that caused, even with obesity continuing up, the heart disease to falter, you know? But it's always misattributed to something else. But anyway, past exposures, they can be related to people who seem to have good bloods and a good history, and yet they get it. And it's hard to say why. The dental thing's another, autoimmune's another hidden autoimmune condition. You know, there are lurkers in there for special cases. It can be really tricky. It's a detective kind of exercise, really, isn't it? For some people.
Who done it? Sharon, I want to get your question there before, because I want to circle back to cream and bacteria, stomach. But Sharon, I know you were curious or concerned about your CAC score.
Yeah, I had my CAC score, and it's incredibly high. It was 812.
It's high for a lady, yeah.
And with it, the report said that the highest level was in my LAD.
Yeah, common enough.
So I actually saw my regular doctor today to see about getting a referral to a cardiologist, which he gave me, but he suggested I start taking low dose aspirin. Sorry.
And unless you've got a kind of bleeding issue or ulcer issue or some other contraindication, that's a general blanket recommendation just for anti-clotting action, because ultimately the CAC or the calcification is simply evidence that the inflammatory process of heart disease has been very active for a long time. It's your history. And it's just the body attempting to shore up soft plaque and make them more firm and less likely to have a clot or a rupture. So high CAC is high risk, not really because of the calcium, but because it says, hey, you got a load of soft plaque also, because that's the road to the calcification. And then aspirin, because most heart events, you know, are a rupture and causing clots, that's a kind of a mitigation in the short term, or maybe long term. That they like to do that. Now, I presume when they see a high CAC in America, they're going to add on a cocktail of drugs. I mean, that's usually the medical system. They throw, no?
Yeah, well, I already take a statin, a low dose statin. And so my LDL was 128. And he was telling me that they'll want it less than 70.
That's the guidelines. I mean, to me personally, from the science and all my network, doctors, scientists, these numbers of lower LDL, basically, you know, if you only have a hammer, all you see are nails. And that's where these guys are. They just have LDL. That's their totem, their magic thing. Now, it's completely misleading because we have guys with LDL of 1100 for 20 years who have clear arteries, unusually clear, at the age of around 70. We have examples of that. LDL at 1,100. So we know the LDL is not the problem, but LDL correlates with the problem, and that's what they have a drug to control. It's a nail. And that's just to be nice about it. But so, yeah, they got a thing going a good few years ago that low is good, but lower is better. And whenever anyone has evidence of a problem, they run straight for the LDL totem. It's all they got.
Yeah.
You know, there's papers entitled lowest is best. Actual papers with that in the title from the drug industry and the medical industry. It's just an obsession. And then you show them, yeah, but the Catavans with the lowest heart disease in the world, right, over on the other side of the world and other populations, they've got higher particle LDL numbers than Americans. And they've no heart disease, and America has masses. And obviously there's no answer to that. It's obviously not the LDL, but they can't. They're cognitive dissonance. So look, I always allow for the statin because if someone has a risk, like Arthur Agatston says, good friend of mine who invented the score, the calcium score, he said, look, when I have a patient who has a problem or I'm seeing progression of calcification and he's not definitely in a safe zone, it's the precautionary principle. He says, I don't think much of statins, but you know what? I add it in there. Yeah, it's kind of covering my ass, but also someone who has a high score, a high problem, arguably a high risk, I got to give him everything that's there. But yeah, he agrees. It's not a big help, small help. The diet, the regime, all the stuff we talk about, that's the massive lifesaver if done properly. It's not magic, but it's close to magic. Whereas the drug is like, you know, it nudges out events in clinical trials and it shows some efficacy. It's very underwhelming. Even in the drug industry data, you're kind of saying, is that it? But anyway.
Well,
Yeah,
I just sorry, Sharon, yeah.
Well, it just is concerning because even for him telling me to take the aspirin, he told me that there was a formula that they use to see if you should take the aspirin. And he put all the information about me in it. And it said I was low risk and didn't need to take it. And
from blood
he said, well, I think we can't follow that. They put like your blood pressure and some other numbers.
Yeah. And the problem there is the blood numbers they use in their equation are fallible. They're statistical correlations taken from American populations over 30 years. So they broadly, they're the Framingham risk type thing. So for whatever reason, your bloods do not push up the Framingham risk and your cholesterol is relatively low and that's used in it. So your bloods do not indicate high risk, but the calcification shows, well, regardless, you have a ton of calcification. And that's why we always said, you know, the risk factors are fine. You know, they're a guideline, they give you an idea, but at the end of the day, the scan looks into the heart and sees, well, what did happen? What actually happened? So your doctor's stuck with that problem that the blood say do this, and the calcium score, which they rejected for 30 years, they don't like it because it shows no correlation between cholesterol and heart disease. And it's not good for drugs because it would get people off drugs in many cases. So the medical business hates the calcium scan. Also, it would have the number of people they get to do very lucrative angiograms on, because all the zero low score guys would not need an angiogram and they'd lose all the revenue. So they're against the calcium scan, but the reality, and that's why the calcium scan is not properly in the judgment call.
Yeah.
But it's a problem for them. They just don't, because they don't understand heart disease, they don't know what to do with a high score when their magic little blood numbers don't tell them what to do. Do you see what I mean? They got a problem.
Ivor, Donal made a very good point last week or the week before, and he said doctors are taught to understand that if you can't interpret the numbers, then don't test it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Exactly. That's it. And that's how they got all the doctors on board, because there's several profiteering, unethical reasons they pushed against calcium, but also they were pushing against an open door, because the doctors didn't really want something that the patient would be asking them. But my cholesterol's been low for 30 years and I eat my whole grains. Why have I got a 780 score? Doctor won't have a clue, because the doctors say, well, your cholesterol is low. I don't know. And they don't like that. And you know, idiopathic blood pressure or essential hypertension, and it means the most common form of high blood pressure actually is idiopathic. And it means blood pressure that's high with no known cause, no etiology, no kidney disease. It's just high. Now, that's overwhelmingly insulin resistance, causes the world's epidemics of high blood pressure. That's idiopathic, and they don't know. But you know, if you measure the person's insulin, all right, you know quickly. Oh, all the high blood pressure people are high in insulin, and the people with good. Anyway, but the other joke my docs have is it's called idiopathic because the idiots don't understand it. But anyway, really high score. The thing is, that's your history, that's your past. The key going forward is how do you slow its progression? Because we have studies that indicate powerfully, and I shared them back in 2014, and incredible, Raggi et al. And they show people with high, higher, and super high scores at the start of a 6-year study. And they track them and they measure their score each year. And upshot of it was that the people who kept increasing their score each year, whether they were moderate, high, higher, or super high, they all had a huge risk. And the people who, now they didn't know why they didn't progress. It was just an observation study. They didn't actually tell them to do stuff. But the people who, as it happened, didn't progress, maybe they went low carb, maybe they took magnesium, who knows? The people who didn't had a remarkably low heart event rate, like 3% heart event, which is kind of background, versus 50% plus for the people who progressed. And even the super high scores over 5 years, once they didn't progress much, their risk was the same as a guy with a lower score. It actually didn't matter how high the score was. Today, once going forward, you didn't progress it. Whatever you'd done in the past, you stopped it, whatever that was. So that's the reason it's always from this day on. The high score is your history. That happened. You did that. Now, what do you do different? And that's my boss, David Bobbitt. He got a 900 and something score, and he's averaged 5% increase per year for the last 7 years. And he's literally in a zone that statistically is as safe as if he had a low score in the first place. Brilliant. Because he managed this: vitamin D, fish oil, exercise, sun exposure. Well, he does everything and every supplement as well. But still, he did it. And his diabetes, he measures blood glucose after each meal generally, not even with a CGM. He uses a pinprick. His fingers are full of pinpricks. It's just his part of his life now. Yeah. He just always checks. When he's in restaurants, he checks, he carefully looks at the menu, he asks questions. He's ruthless.
Okay. And Sharon, just to reassure you, much as I'm against medication as well, the aspirin is my kind of go-to. I've been on it for quite a while now, and I must be honest, I don't really notice the side effects. I mean, I know there's things about bleeding gut and everything moving, long term. But I find it pretty harmless, and you know, I don't really worry about the aspirin at all, to be honest. And I know that my doctor here, as well as all my holistic doctor, has also given me a list of things that I can use instead of an aspirin that will have the same effect. And we're going to have a guy in as well who's a supplement guy who's also going to be talking about other things you can do, non-medical things that you can take that have the same effect as an aspirin, antiplatelet and blood thinning. So not, yeah, I would say it's not major concern. Sorry, Ivor, but it's not major concern for me anyway. So
yeah. I agree. I wouldn't worry. Aspirin is really baby stuff, even compared to statins are more metabolically and physiologically disruptive, cutting off the mevalonate pathway and possibly disrupting vitamin K metabolism. And, you know, it's kind of giving some benefit and then giving some harm as well in a mixed bag. Whereas aspirin, you'd much more say, look, there's no real harm in aspirin. There's other putative benefits too. I forget what they are, but I came across them. And yeah, it's kind of like, I always give that a pass, the baby aspirin. I mean, it's hard to argue with that.
Right. Colin, you got a question there?
Yeah, Ivor, we're talking about return CAC scans when you've got a high score. I had a 540, I think it was, two years ago. And I had been healthy eating before that. So, but now I've put a lot more things in place. I've cut lots out. How often should that test be repeated? And what will you be looking to find?
Right, Colin. Well, this is purely my rule of thumb, but it's agreed with by Dr. Mike Eads and by Scott Murray, the incredible research cardiologist over in England, and just pretty much everyone else, Budoff even in the States, who's more a pro-pharma guy, but massively knowledgeable in calcification. Rough rule of thumb, in my opinion, is you get a really high score, maybe 18 months. Some would say a year. I'd kind of go 18 months or 2 years later. The key thing is to take the actions. And you could argue, and some people have argued, what's the point of knowing the score if you're doing everything and you do know the stuff? And I say, well, look, there's an argument there. The guy who doesn't know anything, the score will wake him up or her up and tell her, wow, it's progressing. I need to do something. But if you're doing everything, you could argue that's kind of it. Unless, of course, you do everything and then it surprisingly continues to go up, in which case you may be triggered to look for a very special cause, you know, the autoimmunity stuff or something odd. So it's still, the engineer always wants to measure, but very high score, you want to check in maybe a year and a half of doing good stuff and check where things are. If it's a moderate or lowish score for your age, so a heads up but not worrying, I tend to wait 2 or 3 years. You know, because it was lowish and you're addressing it. You don't need to be panicking running down to the CT machine. And then if it's a 0 or very low score, I got a 0 at 47, now I'm 53. I still haven't got another one. So if it's a 0 and you're doing the right stuff broadly, you know, a 0 at middle age is called a 15-year warranty, because all-cause mortality is so low in the next 15 years, they called it a warranty. I mean, it's not 0, but it's just extraordinary. So if you get a 0, you don't want to be complacent, but at the same time, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you can check in and say, am I a non-zero now? Or has it gone high? That'd be a surprise. So that's the kind of breakdown. Year and a half, 2 or 3 years for moderate, kind of 5, 6 years maybe for a 0. And it just kind of makes sense. And then there's density and volume. So you got to be careful you get all the data, because Mikey, who's at our conference actually in April, Mike brought up for me many years ago, density and volume. And it was such a huge point. So when your calcium goes up, it can be more points of interest, right? Or AOI, areas of interest. It can be more calcification, more disease appearing. Or it can be not really more spots, but they've gotten whiter, more dense, whiter on the scan. And that can be consolidation of existing plaque that rolls on for a year or two, even if you stop the process or arrest the process quite well. So he made the point that he knew people who switched to low carb, did it properly, lost weight, bloods got great, and he knows that their risk was collapsed. But a year and a half later, they got a score and it had gone up another 16% in that year. and they were disappointed. And he brought this up, that he's observed himself a rolling on consolidation. And that's why you got to look at the volume and density. And there's a study he found, and it showed that if volume was driving the higher score, there was indeed higher risk. But there was a paradox that people whose score went up quite high, and it was mostly dominated by the density, by the whiteness of the specific spots, they tended to have a lower risk, more like a lower score person. Parabolic curve. So there's nuances there. Do you want to see the progression one if I share the screen for a moment? Because this one's a killer. Wait till you see this.
Well, while I do that, Daniel made a good point that you should always try and get it done at the same machine and the same technician, because there are just even small variations between different machines and interpretations of the results.
It's a noisy test, and remember, your heart's beating so fast they need to do super fast electron beam. Well, that was EBCT. It's a new technology now. Same point though. You need to hold your breath, and they check your pulse. And if your heart rate's a little higher or nervous, they might cancel the scan because they're trying. Your heart's moving. You can imagine your arteries are literally like some kind of a jack in the box all the time. They're bouncing all over the place, every heartbeat. So the problem is there's always blur, and that gives variability. But if you use the same, say 640 slice, same scanner, same technician, you know, who tunes and reads, that will get rid of quite a bit of variability and give you less variability. But your heart still is bouncing, so there will be. And Arthur Agustin showed me tons of scans and how he sees artifacts and blurring, and he almost mentally corrects, because he's such an expert. He mentally corrects if it's slightly high. He kind of looks at the blurring and sees, did the movement of the heart this time tend to make a higher score? Because he knows it so well. But that it's a good point. Same machine, same operator or outfit, good idea.
You've got permission, Ivor, if you want to share something.
Oh, super, yeah. No, this is the Raggy study that is one of my favorite studies ever. And you can see it there, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is 2014, I think, or early 15. And basically, it's just a killer study. So less than 15% per year, and this is a large group of people, and they were on statins, I think, and all of them. They didn't know what the difference was, but less than 15% a year. Here was the survival free of heart events. And no matter what group you're in, they all had the same 6-year outcome. Now, we know that a higher score has a massively higher 5 or 6 year risk, massively. So how could the high scores and the low scores all have the same outcome? Well, these are the group who are less than 15% per year. So they're not just average people where a high score means vastly higher risk. They're all low progressors. So the high score at the start didn't matter. And it's from the same group, the people who had big progression, you can see it's horrifying. The low score people had pretty bad, like 10% events, 5 years. The higher score then within 6 years, they nearly all had events. You know what I mean? I mean, even the lower score was worse than the highest score here. So the percentage yearly change, it's the real big factor. Your high score is your history. It's from now on. I mean, if you had a profound autoimmune condition and you're drinking Coca-Cola and eating pizzas and smoking, and you end up at 1,000 score and you stop doing all of that and fix everything, arguably, if you fix the root causes, your 1,000 score becomes irrelevant. I mean, that's the goal, the prize. It's just a badge of honor. It's scars from battle that's long over. That's the way to think of it. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Ivor, I'm conscious of time for you. Before I would, sorry, there was a noise there. Before we duck out, Ivor, maybe, thank you. Maybe you just want to mention the conference. I'm going to mention it as well anyway in a little bit more detail, but it's just incredible what you're doing at the moment to get some really amazing guys on board.
Oh yeah, it's going to be super. And actually, to be honest, this started as a good idea. And in fairness, and it seemed like a good idea, and let's do a bit of a conference, but it's grown now because of the caliber of people we have coming, which turns it into, I mean, I'm kind of looking at it and realizing this is actually much better than the big low carb conferences, of which I've gone to so many and spoken. And not to be critical, but they've got a load of good guys mixed in with kind of medium and mediocre people, and it's great fun. But this is quite targeted. I mean, we got heavy hitters, and it's focused on heart disease, diabetes, and obesity and chronic disease, and the mystery. How do you fix it? How do you hit all the causes? So it's looking pretty hot. And I'll just, I know you'll be sharing it anyway, but I think it's a great website, Mark, you've done, so I'm just showing it. And also it'll show the list and remind me.
Here we go. Yeah.
Mark has brought in a bunch of guys, some with big followings and, you know, health coaches and various specialties. I've kind of focused on the doctor, cardiologist, hardcore, but very happy. They all came back, no problemo. So it shows you the power of networks. They'd come and do whatever I wanted.
Absolute tribute to you, Ivor. Absolute tribute to you, no question.
Well, I mean, I was kind of chuffed because I thought there'd be a bit of whining about being busy. And, you know, I've been involved in coronavirus in a controversial way, you could say, and maybe some of them will actually know all these guys are 100% agree with my view on the coronavirus. But anyway, so Kendrick, obviously, he's a treasure. Bill Davis, Wheatbelly, he's a big guy. Now, he usually would not, he's a self-made big guy. He usually wouldn't come along to anyone's conference, but I've done pods with him on his pod. He's been on my pod. I pumped his book. We have an actual relationship. So he said, yeah, no problem. He's going to do LDL particles, lipoproteins, and diet interactions and the gut. That's going to be his title. Dr. Scott Murray is kind of a genius cardiologist. Dr. Agatston himself is going to come, you know, the inventor of the score. He's unbelievable. He's still scanning people that he first scanned nearly 40 years ago. Wow. Same patients. He's been watching. He looks at serial scans like a master detective, you know, like Sherlock Holmes. He's looking at every feature of the serial scans. Most doctors wouldn't even know what a scan meant. Never mind a serial scan differential. So anyway, that's Agatston. Dr. Mike Eads is brilliant. And he's going to do the paleo diet all the way back to the Egyptians and what they were really eating and where they calcified. And what about Neolithic man? Whether you were a farmer with grains or whether you were the same genetics, same period, but you were staying hunter-gatherer, what was the difference in their dentition, you know? And then bring it all the way to the current day. And he's also going to go through density and volume, that thing I mentioned, because in fairness, he pretty much discovered it for me. And we have Professor Tim Noakes 2 nights ago agreed to come along. And I'd like him to do his amazing talk or a new version of what he did in Iceland when I met him there in 2016 and interviewed him. He did a talk on the evidence for the liver being the seat of cardiac disease. And it was just super. So anyway, I know I got to run, but I know you're going to continue and talk about, Mark, about the breakout groups and we're not just doing the talks.
Yeah, I'll talk to the group about this, but it's fabulous what's going on here, Ivor, and appreciate it so much. Thank you. And also that you're with us today. Thanks very much for the time, Ivor, and looking forward to see you a bit later today. Thanks for that.
Absolutely. Listen, guys, till next time. Thanks a lot, Mark. And
all right.
Forwards.
Yeah, Ivor.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. All right.
Sorry.
Well, I'm a little bit blown away now.
Sorry, I'm trying to get out here. My Zoom window won't open. I got it.
Off he goes. Yeah. So I don't quite know what to say. Ivor said it all there actually about this conference. It was an idea that I sort of ran by him to say maybe we should do. Actually, the original idea was to do it hybrid, like, you know, have some people together in a podium and some people, you know, people coming in live. But then with the whole Corona thing and then, you know, doing a bit of cost analysis, it was going to be quite expensive. So, and Ivor's really got behind it. I'm absolutely blown away. Getting all these guys to just say, yeah, do it. And as you saw there, I put together something. We've sort of did a soft launch, not with you guys, because I want to offer you guys something special anyway. I don't just want you to, you know, to mix with the hoi polloi, so to speak. So if you'll bear with me till Monday, I've got to do a bit of fine tuning and trimming over the weekend to get that exactly right. But on Monday, I'll send something out to you guys so you see what's coming on. Don't worry, your seats are guaranteed. It's not like you're going to missing out on anything. It's just exactly how that's going to be done. So that's quite exciting. April the 9th, in case I didn't mention it, is the day. It's a Saturday. There's going to be plenty of activity before then. You'll hear lots about it. But today, that was a pretty cool focus with Ivor. I was quite blown away. The one thing I wanted to, I started to, I think he's dropped. Chris, there you are. One thing we started to talk about this morning was the yogurt making thing, as per William Davis. And I very much done the cream, gone down the cream way of treating it. Using full cream and putting the